My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasangran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. In the last few classes, I covered part 1 of chapter 3. Today we start part 2 of chapter 3. And in this, you will see that, we're going to cover, this is on pages 158 onwards, right? So you will see that in this first passage, in this chapter, Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa of what this, the Brahman is, what is nature, what is life, all those things. So he explains this with an example. He says that the world is like a big banyan tree. And he says that it is rooted high above. So he says the highest level is Brahman. And then like a tree, you have branches. He says the branches are like men and women and animals and insects and plants. They spread out like the branches. He's trying to explain nature. And he's trying to explain the nature of this universe, the world, human beings, and the nature of Brahman. So like how a teacher is explaining to a young boy with lots of example, here is one example he gives. He says that, this world that we live in, phenomenal world, is timeless. He says, very interestingly, he says that, it comes, and it comes and goes again and again, waves after waves, right? You see in this material world, it begins, it sustains for a while and dissolves. In the dissolution, new things emerge. And this cycle continues, waves after waves. Even our body, even our body, we assembled it from some other elements. And then for a while, it comes together as our body, sustains for a while, and then it dissolves, right? So he explains this cycle, and he says that the root of this tree is Brahman. So root is where essence of all the nutrients, is taken up, right? So the roots is the core part of our tree. Without the roots, the tree cannot grow. Without the roots, you see that the tree cannot flourish and fruit. So he says in that same way, the Brahman is that root. It is the source of everything. He explains it's pure, and it is said to be immortal. It is transcendental to time. He says everything rests on it. Every planet, every molecule, everything rests on this Brahman. So everything is supported by this root. He says nothing can surpass it. This is the true self, the self that Nachiketa was trying to search for and seeking. So here the banyan tree is explaining as an example of how Brahman, this universe, all the beings in this universe, in our world, including us, the interrelationship. And I want to show you what that is. It looks something like this. This is the spiritual banyan tree that I was able to create. So it starts off with the roots above. So it's like an upside down, right? Tree. The roots are above, he explains, right? They are the supreme and eternal, imperishable Brahman. So think of the roots as deep inside us, right? So this is number one, deep inside us. It is the supreme and eternal. It is not touched by space and time. It's imperishable. Though the body may be perishable, that cannot be perishable. Though the body can be, amputated, that cannot be amputated. So the root, although in a tree, the root is down, here it's explaining, the root is from the top, where for us, the root is deep inside us. Right? That is eternal, he says. Then he says that this eternal Brahman, this is number 2, he's explaining that roots, which is the supreme and eternal imperishable self, and he explains what that eternal imperishable self is. That which is not touched by space and not touched by time, right? So if time is not there, then the fact of, the idea of birth is not there. If time is not there, the notion of death also is not there. So he's explaining the supreme abode, that imperishable, that eternal is unborn and undying. It's transcendental to everything. So he's explaining this part, which is the number 2 I've put as number 2. Right? He's explaining this tree. He's unraveling this tree. So think of the tree. The deep roots is within us, that supreme Brahman. And that component, in the number 2, it says that it's unborn and undying. It is transcendental to everything. It exists in sleep. It exists in deep, in a dream state. It exists in the waking state. Right? It is transcendental to everything. Right? Then he explains the leaves. The leaves, the Vedas. This is the wisdom knowledge. Right? So you have that eternal Brahman from the roots. The roots give rise to all the leaves. The leaves are the wisdom knowledge that comes from Vedas and all the scriptures. So he's explaining to Nachiketa this analogy. And then he explains that leaves, the Vedas, gives you that knowledge for the mind to be dharmic. That means that which sustains our life. That which gives us what is viveka and vairagya. Right? And then he explains that when we know what is real and unreal, then we also know our actions and the fruits of the actions. This is number 4. The fruits are what? Karmas, our actions, that leads to joy or sorrow or merit or demerit, bondage or freedom. So he's explaining how this knowledge teaches us the physics of this material world, which is the cause and effect, the joy-sorrow cycle, the sukha-dukkha cycles, right? And the bondage and the freedom. So he's explaining step by step, starting with the supreme eternal bliss, which is neither born nor dies, right? From there, we get that wisdom knowledge of what sustains life, that which sustains life. Without that, life does not exist. Consciousness does not make any sense, right? So he says, and the fruits of this, he says, is our actions, ability to cognize this world, ability for the body and the mind to experience this material world. Experiencing the material world, it gets, has to follow the rules of this material world, which is cause and effect, right? And that leads to joy and sorrow. This is number 4. So he says that as how our thoughts are, so is the action. What we think, our actions, and the actions lead to the destiny of human beings. So he's explaining how this Brahman in this material world manifests as our human personality, right? So he says that how our thought is, that is how our actions are. Our actions leads to the destiny of our lives. Then he goes on to explain that the tree is actually the manifested universe, the field of experience. All of us have an experience of this material world. It's like the tree in us, the trunk that holds all the leaves, right? The field of experience, right? He says the trunk is what the cosmic intelligence is. the cosmic intelligence, the ahamkara, the individualism, our mind, the manas, our senses, the elements, the panchabuddhas. So he says the tree has a trunk. In the trunk, you have the cosmic intelligence, individual self, the mind, our indriyas, our senses, and the elements that make of this trunk, right? So here it is that, uh, what is the trunk? The ability, our cosmic intelligence that gives us, the ability to cognize things. It gives us that individual identity of who we are, you know, as a self, and also that subjective self, and also the object self. It gives us the software to operate in this material world called the mind. It gives us that indriya, so the senses, to be able to experience this material world. And the material world that we experience is made out of all the elements, the panchabutas, matter, water, air, fire, space, right? So he's explaining this trunk, the analogy of the trunk, the tree and the trunk. He says that branches from that trunk is what the different worlds that we live in. The Deva, the Manusha, which is the human, and then the lower level of. So he's explaining that within the tree there are different branches, different states of existence. See, all of us, in the morning we wake up, we are a householder, we go to office, we are, or either a boss or a worker, you know. So we play different roles. So the branches have different roles. So within us, the tree has different branches, different roles and responsibilities that we play. Right? So, and then he says that the shoots that come out of the branches are what we call desires, new desires, new worlds that we create, new identities, right? He says, and this desires is what binds the soul to the cycle. Remember that, this material world, we experience that space-time continuum, and we experience that Sukha-Dukkha cycles, the birth-death cycles. So here, as the mind becomes more entrenched at this level, it also gets bound by this cycle, right? So he then goes on to explain the aerial roots. See, the aerial roots, the roots that come out, not the main roots, right? On the side. He said they grow downwards, binding the soul. So as we do see more roots come and they bind us in this material world, more responsibilities, more interactions. So you see that, you have a lot of desires. You want to buy a car, you buy an expensive car. You see that eventually you're caught up by loans, you're caught up by so much expenses. You're getting more and more entrenched into this material world, right? So you have a car for a few years, you feel, oh, the car is not, when you first got the car, you're so excited. After a few years, you say, I want to get a bigger car, a better car. So we become more and more locked into that material world. Right? He goes on to explain. Then he says, now, within this tree of understanding, the tree, the branches, the trunks, the shoots, the aerial roots that forms to hold on to the material world. He says, in all this, there is always a seeker. There is something in us that is always seeking for what is real and what is not real, right? So in this, Mahan used to say, kudal pasi, udal pasi, ullatin pasi. We have hunger for food. We eat the food, we get satisfied. We hunger for relationships. We get the relationships, we're satisfied. But there is a hunger for the inner self, knowing the inner self. And for that, that seeker, through his good deeds, over the what they call the shreyas and the prayers, they're able to lead to the teacher that teaches them the truth of that self. So if our prayers, the search for desires, is much, much higher than the search for the goodness and the truth, it'll be very difficult to acquire this knowledge. So it's explaining the material universe in its grand scale. Is also explaining the traps in that material grand scale. And to be able to be liberated from that, one needs a guru or seek a guru or a teacher to teach you what is shreyas and prayers and how this helps one to discover the truth of the self. So you need to be a seeker first to understand this, and then you need to discover a teacher that is enlightened. There is a beautiful saying that when the disciple is ready, the guru shows up. Right? When the disciple has all the material wealth and the gains and all those things, they still may not get the right teacher. Right? So here he's explaining this nature of this material world. Right? So he then goes on to explain that what is this prayers and shreyas? Right? And I think we covered this. It's about the path of pleasure, sensory, material enjoyment. The more our mind is caught up by that gravity of that materiality, the more it is hard to break away from it. The more it finds it hard to understand who we are, what our true nature is, and the Brahman in us, which is so deeply rooted in us, which is the roots. We miss it, right? And he says that when one gravitates towards Shreyas, the path to wisdom, knowledge, discipline, self-control, you see that you get that parinama valachi or the inner growth and the liberation. Right? So you see that here he explains that how, the nature of this material world through this banyan tree, where he shows that what's the nature of God, the nature of this universe, the nature of all biological beings, the nature of human beings, the nature of the human mind, that either enables you to attain that enlightened state of that Brahman or blinds you from seeing it and cognizing it. So he explains this, that to be able to discover this, one, look at the banyan tree, and he says that the roots are so deep, right? And the tree itself is the body that gives you the field of experience, right? The trunk is our cosmic intelligence. We all have a cosmic intelligence. Whether we know it or not, it is there. We have the ahangaram. All of us have our own individual personality, right? We have our own mind and senses, and we have some understanding of the Panchabhutas, though our understanding may be very different, right? So he goes on to explain that our spiritual realm is like the banyan tree. He says, and we get more and more entrenched to this material world. The more desire we get, the more roots form, the more leaves you get, more fruits you get, and the cycle continues. So here he says that, cut the roots of attachment, right? Learn to outlive it with an act of discrimination and realize the self. So the only way to overcome ignorance, the only way to divinize our desires is to have that sharp mind that is able to discriminate between what is real and unreal, what is mortal and immortal, what is finite and infinite, what is permanent and what is impermanent. Right? He says that remove that roots of desire. So, for example, a tree has roots. When you cut off the tree, eventually the tree completely withers away. In that same way, as long as the roots of the desire is there, wanting more and more and more, you see that our thought becomes more and more wanting it. We action it. Sometimes we regret it. We say things. So he says that the path to enlightened living is to be able to, slowly slowly overcome that attachment, and through the practice of viveka and vairagya. He says only then one is free from sorrow and attain the supreme. So in this he explains through the banyan tree that how from the Brahman right up to our own personality. He says one who, uh, gravitates towards Shreyas, the path of wisdom, self-control, discipline, inner growth, inner spiritual growth and liberation. He says for them, the realization of the self becomes very clear. Who they are. He says, you are not the body, not the mind, not the senses. I am that eternal self, the pure consciousness, which is unborn, undying, and beyond sorrow. I am that, the Supreme Brahman. So as we go through this, right, as we understand the roots within us, the branches, the trunks, the shoots, all those things, as we have very good handle of it, slowly, we are able to minimize that, shrunkeness of the mind and the intellect, and we become transcendental. And that is the attainment of the self. So he explains to to Nachiketa this path. Says that the self is distinct, different from the body, mind, and senses. He says the wise ones, say that it is the real. It discerns that self is able to differentiate between what is real and unreal. That self is eternal. It's everywhere, all pervading, and it does not decay. The body decays, but the self does not. He says, know the self and be free from fear of death and fear from coming back again. So here he explains this banyan tree as a good example to explain that Brahman, right up to all the fruits of our desires. To go back to that Brahman state, one needs to take the path that leads us to Shreyas, the path to enlightened living, right, and discipline. So here, in this passage, it says that know the tree as it is. That means the tree here is that the field of experience, the manifested universe, the field of experience. It says, know this very well. The universe is part of us, and we are part of that universe. Right? And be liberated by it. It says, this is what immortality is, to be able to understand, cognize there is something far, far, far greater than our biology. As we intensify our introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation and service to become humble and humility, we see that slowly we break away from that, gravity of that materiality. The mind settles down to that realm of the spiritual. And you see the mind is absorbed in it. The mind views the world with it. The mind, analyzes it, and becomes more and more deeper and more enlightened. So this is what this passage is trying to tell us, right? So next week, I'm going to cover a little bit more in depth, but here we covered many of this, but now this saint explains to Nachiketa using the banyan tree. Those days, banyan tree was abundant. So great masters will use what is around the nature, If the master was today, the master will probably use AI or ChatGPT, right? Those days, they don't have all that. So what they do, they look at nature. They look at the tree, they look at the animals, they look at, to be able to relate to that Brahman in all of us. So in this, we are all that banyan tree, and if we understand the banyan tree, the fruits of our outcomes will be transcendental, spiritual, and impactful. This is what this passage is trying to tell us. Sandosham.